Okay, we're here today with Mr. Church. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Rol Church, and I was I was a member of the 173rd Airborne in 1968, and I happened to be on a patrol with Corporal James Scott Brown, and I'll tell you a little bit about that day, a little bit about Corporal Brown, and let me get started. So the day was really a balmy, quiet day. There wasn't really any particular sense that something was about to happen. Things had been pretty quiet in our operational area at the time.
This is May of 1968.
May of 1968,
Okay.
actually May 10th, which is yesterday was the 49th anniversary.
That's a really good point.
So, and I thought maybe I should tell this story while I still can remember the details, or I'm still around to be able to tell them. So here we go. Just a little background. I'll tell you a little bit about the platoon leader, to give you a sense of what we were doing. The platoon leader was a guy named Jim Taylor. He was a Distinguished Service Cross recipient. He was at a Special Forces camp where I know him as Captain Williams, but evidently Captain Williams was a second lieutenant, and Captain Williams won the Medal of Honor at this action, and Jim Taylor was part of that. Jim was a very, very competent platoon leader. He didn't take a lot of risks. He didn't do things that I thought weren't always the smartest thing to do. He did things right. Jim had a number of scars that I guess reminded him that one can get seriously injured in Vietnam, and that probably accounted for his cautiousness. After Jim came home from winning being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, he went to Officer Candidate School, and he was a graduate there in 1968. I can remember I was in another action before that, and that had gone on for several days. And Jim came in pretty much when that battle was wrapping up. And I remember this was the first probably big battle other than the Tet Offensive that I was part of, and I was going to tell him a thing or two about what goes on in Vietnam. And he let me talk for a little while, and then he told me that the hill that we were on, Ridgeline in fact, looked pretty much the same from when he was there last in 1965. So then I learned his background, and I shut up and listened to a man that had a lot more experience than I had. I remember the day that we went, there's parts of the day I do remember, there's other parts that I don't. I don't remember how we were going to be inserted into the operational area. Typically we went in by helicopter. I don't think we did that day, but I honestly don't remember. But I can remember one of the things Jim would do was when a patrol was going to go out, he would check them in, and he would make sure, he would tap the ammo pouches and make sure the ammo pouches were heavy, because some guys would be lazy and they'd wear an ammo pouch, but the ammo pouch would be empty because they didn't want to carry the weight. Jim would check those types of things. As I mentioned before, he didn't take what I would call unnecessary risks. he was a cautious guy. I know there was times that we would be given instructions to go from point A to point B, and they'd want us there by a specific time. Well, the time really was arbitrary, and usually to slow things down, we would find trails or whatever along the way that we'd have to do a reconnaissance of. I think really to stop this fast pace from point A to point B. The patrol itself that day was not a full platoon. Our company had been operating at really a pretty reduced manning. Infantry company back then, I think, had somewhere around 100, should have had around 120 soldiers assigned to it, and we were operating probably between 60 and 80, depending at the time, and what had happened previously. So our platoon, we only had 2 rifle squads, and then we brought the machine gun, and we referred to the machine gun as the gun. And so 2 rifle squads, the machine gun, which would include the machine gunner, the assistant machine gunner. Corporal Brown was the assistant machine gunner, and a forward observer, which happened to be me at the time. I don't specifically remember any stated mission. It was more, and lots of times it happened, this is quite common, that you would be put out on patrol, essentially, just do a reconnaissance, looking for signs of enemy, and if by chance you stumbled onto somebody in a firefight should ensue, usually we would call in artillery close air support and deal with it that way. I think, as I said before, the operational area had been very quiet. Nothing had been going on for, I don't know, probably at least a month, at least from our perspective. There hadn't been any big battles for a while. It was May, and I think the previous battle that I referred to when Jim Taylor came out, that would have been in March. So we had some activity in March and April, and we came in from an area up north, and we were in Ankei, or outside of Ankei. So as we were patrolling, and it was kind of a mixed terrain. There were some areas that were relatively flat and intermittent trees or shrubs or whatever, and then there were areas that was more wooded. And we came upon a ridge, and evidently we were on top of this ridge. We had to descend this ridge down to a creek that was down below us, and the creek, or the ridge, the embankment of the ridge was very, very steep, and we actually had to slide along on our rear ends, because you couldn't stand up and go down negotiate down the hill. I was approximately about halfway down the hill when I heard a shot, 1 or 2, I can't remember now, 1 or 2 shot ring out. And the message came back by radio to the platoon leader, to Jim Taylor, that the platoon, or the point man for the platoon, had spotted a North Vietnamese soldier filling his canteen down in the creek bed, and he ended up shooting him. It was shortly after that a couple more shots rang out, if I recall right. And I don't know if it was the platoon or if it was the point man or somebody in the point element, but they ended up shooting a second North Vietnamese soldier. So, probably about half of us had already got to the base now of this ridge along the creek, and there was still some of the platoon that was coming down. When Lieutenant Taylor ordered us to set up what we call a hasty ambush along the creek, figuring that maybe there were more NVA soldiers that were going to be traveling along the creek, and we would be able to ambush them. As we got down to the base, unfortunately, we had ended up seizing the low ground, not usually a tactical advantage. Not only were we on the low ground, but we actually found ourselves in a U-shaped like canyon. And so, and what we also didn't know at the time is that there were a lot more NVA soldiers in this area, and were in a higher position than what we were. If they weren't already there, they got to the high ground before we could get to the high ground. As we were moving into the position, the machine gunner who was following us, there was some kind of higher grass. I don't remember how high, but probably in the 3 feet, maybe 4 foot high grass along the bank. The machine gunner evidently stepped over a North Vietnamese soldier that was crouching in the grass. That soldier fell back, and when he fell back, he took a shot at the machine gunner, missed the machine gunner. And that shot struck Corporal Brown. It hit Corporal Brown in the head. I did not see that exact moment, but shortly thereafter I saw our medic who was attending to Corporal Brown. And the medic was trying to put a bandage on Corporal Brown's head. And honestly, I don't know at that point whether Corporal Brown had been killed, or if he was still alive. I don't know. So immediately after that that event, Corporal Brown being shot, a firefight ensued. And it was a pretty intense firefight for a while. My job was to call in artillery fire, and from my position, I really couldn't see much. So I left the area a little bit, and I moved up on the ridge to try and see if I could get a better vantage point. it was my experience in Vietnam as a foreign observer that you really couldn't see the artillery that you were adjusting. It was you really did it by sound, just because of the foliage around you. One of the things we had to do, we were not being supported by our organic artillery. Typically what happens is you would have an artillery battery that was assigned to a specific battalion to provide support. In this case, our assigned battery was off somewhere else, and we were being supported by the 1st Field Force Artillery. And I can remember when I called in, it was policy that you would have to declare a contact fire mission. And
Can we explain what that is?
so, okay, yeah, a contact fire mission is fire is actually being exchanged. This would be direct fire, small arms fire is being directly exchanged between one another. You are in contact. So I can remember that the